Hello, and welcome to the tutorial on repurchase agreements. Let's start with the definition. Technically, a repurchase agreement, or repo, is the sale of a security with a simultaneous agreement to repurchase it at a fixed price on a future date, often the next day. Economically, however, a repo is a secured short-term loan with the security being sold acting as collateral and the price differential between the sale and repurchase price being the interest. Let's look at this in terms of box diagrams. So over here we see the cash lender and the cash borrower. Cash lender is advancing cash V0 and is getting the collateral, the government T-bill from the borrower, from the cash borrower. The next day, it all reverses. So the cash borrower pays back slightly more, cash V1, and the cash lender returns the government T-bill. And the difference between V1 and V0 is the interest. So let's look at an illustration. Suppose we have a loan for $25 million done via repo. So selling government T-bills for $25 million and agreeing to repurchase them the next day for $25,006,000. So we have two questions. What is the quoted interest rate under the conventions for the repo market? And second, what is the effective annual rate? Well, the interest, let's start with the interest. The interest is the difference, the $6,000 here in purple. And so to get the interest return for 1 day, we take the interest and divide it by the amount of the loan, 25 million, or 0.024%. That's in 1 day. Now to convert that to the quoted rate, remember we're using the convention for the repo market, and for the US that is a 360-day year. So we would multiply the 1-day rate, 0.024%, by the number of days assumed to be in a year, 360, and we get the annual rate of 8.64% per annum. Now, if we want to look at the effective annual rate, which is the compounded rate, we need to compound that 0.024% for 365 days. Now note it's 365 and not 360 days because the effective annual rate is reflecting the actual return for the year. And an actual year has 365 days. So we take that compounded rate and we get 9.15%. Now, what if it's for a longer term, say 30 days? Well, the example changes a little bit. So now we have a 30-day repo. We're getting 180,000 of interest here, and we're assuming here it's just 30 times the 6,000, so the same daily rate over 30 days. So 180,000 over 25 million is 0.72%, but that's for 30 days. Now to convert that to a quoted rate, we basically will multiply 360 over 30, which is the number of such periods in a year, times the amount earned in the 30 days, and we get our annual rate of 8.64%, which you note is the same as before. Now the effective annual rate, we're not compounding every day, we're going to compound every 30 days. So how many 30-day periods are there in a 365-day year? Well, that's this 365 over 30. So we'll compound it for those periods, number of periods, which will be slightly more than 12, and subtract 1 to convert it to a rate, and we get 9.12%. And you'll note that that is slightly less than what we got before. So 9.15% when we were doing daily compounding, 9.12% when we're doing monthly compounding effectively. Now, what are the reasons for doing repos? Who are the participants and what are the motivations? So let's look at this from the point of view both of the repo buyer and the repo seller. So first, the transaction. So the repo buyer is the one that's lending cash and accepting collateral, and the repo seller is doing the reverse, borrowing cash and posting collateral. These transactions are sometimes called reverse repos from the point of view of the repo buyer, and doing a repo from the point of view of the seller. So again, this is the same transaction from the point of view of the two sides of the transaction. Now, the motivation for the repo buyer is typically to invest extra cash for short periods, wanting minimal risk. And the repo seller, it is to efficiently finance a bond inventory, perhaps, or to raise liquidity quickly against collateral that they may have. Now, who are the players? Well, private players on the buyer side would be corporate treasuries. money market mutual funds who are looking again for secure short-term investments, also commercial banks and bond dealers. And on the repo seller side, we'll also have bond dealers and commercial banks who are really motivated by one of these considerations up here. Now, the monetary authority, the central bank, is also often a player in the repo market. Central banks can use repos, being repo buyers, to temporarily increase the money supply since they're lending cash, putting it in the system, or to temporarily decrease the money supply since they're borrowing cash and taking it out of the system for a short period of time. Now, why do all this? Why is a repo, in fact, a safer investment? To look at this, let's compare an unsecured loan to a repurchase agreement and look at the box and flow diagrams for the two types of borrowing. So if we were doing an unsecured loan, the cash lender is lending cash to the cash borrower, and they're getting an IOU, a promise to pay from the borrower. And then the next day, they're getting their cash back plus interest, and they're returning the IOU. Now, the repo has essentially the same cash and security flow, but instead of sending an IOU back to the cash lender, they're actually giving a government T-bill. So on the next day, tomorrow, they pay cash V1 and the T-bill is returned. And in this case, the interest is V1 minus V0. But as long as nothing goes wrong, the mechanics essentially give the same result. But what if something does go wrong? What happens if the cash borrower defaults? So if we're looking at the unsecured loan now, the next day, party B, the borrower, fails to repay the loan to party L. In other words, defaults on the IOU. So the cash lender is left with his IOU and no cash. And they have a claim on B, but that claim is now in default, so of limited value. Contrast that with what happens here. If B fails to repurchase the T-bill, the cash lender is left with the T-bill instead of cash. But that's a lot better because L can keep and sell that T-bill. And that T-bill is not in default and may be worth something close to V1. Now, while the default risk on a repo is limited, it's not completely eliminated. So the important thing to note here is if the market value of the collateral today is equal to the amount borrowed, its market value may not be enough tomorrow. So it's enough today, but not enough tomorrow because the price can change. So what could happen here? Suppose the cash lender lent cash and took the collateral under a repo arrangement, but B is defaulted, so the collateral's not returned and they're not repaid from the cash borrower. Instead, cash lender is going to sell the collateral in the market, and they're going to get a price P1 for that collateral, which may be different than V1. In fact, it could be less than V1. And so the loss would be the difference. If P1 is less than V1, that amount is potentially at risk to the cash lender. Now, it's worth noting that this is likely going to be a small fraction of V1. So if they did the unsecured loan, they would have a potential loss of V1. Here, they only have the potential loss of V1 minus P1. Now, how is it possible for the repo cash lender to lose money when the borrower defaults? Let's look at an illustration. So suppose today the collateral value is worth $25 million and the loan amount's the same, $25 million. And then tomorrow, the collateral value drops by 2%. So it's no longer worth 25 million, it's worth 24.5 million. And the loan amount is 25 million plus a little bit of interest over here. So the potential loss is the difference between the two, about 0.5 million. And so even though this is collateralized and the entire 25 million isn't at risk, the 0.5 million that arose because of the drop in value of the collateral is at risk. Now, I should note here also that if it had gone the other direction, if the collateral value had gone up 2% instead of down 2%, that the cash lender can't keep the difference and profit from the default. Now, default risk on a repo can be mitigated by using collateral that is less likely to go down in value. In other words, to have collateral with lower price volatility. So that could be collateral with lower interest rate risk, certainly collateral with higher credit quality. a strong issuer instead of a weak issuer. And certainly collateral with liquidity, so it's easily sold in the market, so that it isn't likely they'll have difficulty finding borrowers and lose value there because of the illiquidity. So in sort of looking at the types of collateral that would be safer and the types that would be riskier, we would see government T-bills as being the safest, low duration, strong issuer, and typically very good liquidity. And then at the other extreme, we would have lower grade corporates that might have all of those in this category. Longer maturity, so longer duration, weaker issuer, and potential difficulty in liquidating the collateral. And then these would be intermediate cases. Now, if we look at the one aspect of this collateral volatility, that due to interest rate volatility, we see that the modified duration is an important indicator of that. So if we're looking at 91-day government T-bills, they have very low duration. So that might have a duration of 0.24. Compare that with the modified duration for government 10-year government bond, which could be 8, and then a strip, which only has a single cash flow in 30 years, that might have a modified duration of 28. And so if we were to look at the approximate loss from a 25 basis point rise in rates, we can see how different they are. 0.06% in this case, 2% for the 10-year government bond, that being 25 basis point, 0.25% times 8, and then 7% in the case of the strip. Now, a haircut or extra collateral is another way to mitigate the risk that the cash lender will lose money. So what is the haircut? The haircut is defined as a % reduction in the cash loan versus the market value of the collateral. So this haircut creates a cushion that protects the cash lender. So that means that the market value of the collateral can drop some amount before the cash lender is exposed to potential loss. And clearly, if we have less volatile collateral, then the need for this haircut or the size of the haircut could be less. So let's look at an illustration of this. Suppose we have a haircut of 4%. So that means if we have collateral with a value of 25 million, the loan amount would be 4% less than that, 24 million. So essentially 96% of the loan amount of the collateral value. So we're calling that the haircut. And then suppose the collateral value tomorrow is 2% less. So it drops from 25 million to 24.5 million. That's a decline of 2%. But that's still more than the loan amount of 24 million. So the cash lender is okay. In fact, the cash lender will be okay so long as this drop isn't more than the amount of the haircut. So let's wrap up with some conclusions on repurchase agreements. Repos can function as a form of collateralized loan. Since credit risk is minimal because of this collateralization, repo interest rates are typically very low. Repo buyers are lenders or investors, are money market funds and corporate treasurers, and there are parties that want minimal credit risk on their short-term cash investments. And the repo sellers or borrowers are banks who would want liquidity, or bond dealers who want low-cost financing. And while the collateral implicit in a repo significantly reduces credit risk, we saw that it didn't completely eliminate it. And we also saw that there are ways of mitigating that. So the repo credit risk can be further mitigated by using collateral that has low price volatility, like a treasury bill, and or combining that with a haircut. In other words, having a loan smaller than the amount of the collateral. So that's it on this tutorial on repurchase agreements. Thank you for listening.